Goethe and Schopenhauer as Darwinists. I. Greek view of life. Goethe's evolutionary and vitalist thought. By Guildhelm. Progress has not followed a straight ascending line, but a spiral with rhythms of progress and retrogression, of evolution and dissolution. J. W. Goethe. Contrary to the typical historical illustration, by the time Darwin had published his Origin of Species, the West was already accustomed to his general trajectory of evolutionist thought. The relationship of species upon their homologous organs and structures was already long an accepted theory. Advancements in geology had shown that the age of the Earth was certainly more than a few thousand years, and intellectuals such as Saint Hilaire, Chambers, and Cuvier had already put forth a number of models showing the increasing diversification and complexity of organic life over distant eons. Darwin's achievement was not so much as shocking the world, a duty belonging to the aforementioned, but more in making it comfortable for the public, now certain and beyond all possible disbelief in what would be called evolution. Of course, strains of evolutionary thought can be seen even in the distant pre-Socratic Greeks, who offered no shortage of different theories on the essence and qualities of nature. Empedocles is often credited with the first naturalist theory of evolution, whereby organic life arose naturally by and remained driven by the push of strife and the pull of eros between the four classical elements. Perhaps most interestingly, he offered up the possibility that such a cosmogonic drama was bound to make innumerable strange mistakes. Necks without heads, legs without feet, and even the mythological beasts of multiple combined natures, the Minotaur, Centaur, Griffin, and Sphinx. Most of these mistakes were incompatible with nature, perishing immediately or eventually. Those which were compatible or offered an advantage would persist. Thus, as distant as the 5th century BC, we have shimmerings of the concept of the survival of the fittest. Yet even further back we may look to Thales and Anaximander, who offered that the essence of the world, first principle, was water, fluid, dynamic, and alive, the world lives. The fluid nature of the world could be, for the Milesians, symbolized by the mythological Proteus, that mythical shape-shifting, old man of the sea. Heraclitus in a similar but unique fashion postulated the first principle to be that of fire, of ceaseless and unending change which consumes the once fixed position of all things. Yet the strain of thought that was favorable to the naturalistic view of organic life would soon be replaced by another, that life-denying instrument in the disintegration of Hellas, Nietzsche, Twilight of the Idols, that was put to work in the philosophy of Plato and Socrates, which in its intellectual and moralistic discomfort with flux set atop our world another of permanence and unchanging ideals. The result of this shift in philosophy produced a set of ideas that earned Plato the title of the great anti-hero of evolutionary thinking, according to the biologist Ernst Mayr, who attributed to this shift four distinct concepts. There are four concepts that appear particularly important in Agassiz, a critic of Darwin, thinking. 1. A rational plan of the universe. 2. Typological thinking. 3. Discontinuism, and 4. An ontogenetic concept of evolution. Each of these concepts is rooted in Greek philosophy, particularly that of Plato, and we will not be able to discuss the evolutionary consequences without an occasional reference to the philosophical basis. Mayr, Agassiz, Darwin, and Evolution, 1959. Through its proud and long-lived daughter in the Christian Church, the Platonic conception of nature had rested its laurels on top of the West with this understanding for thousands of years. The world was rationally ordered in the higher realm, and from it came a certain plan that produces the material realm. This plan produced organisms which belong to certain immutable categories or bodytypes, a fundamental discontinuity which could not be transgressed by mechanical causes. The concept of species is denied as a material reality and only a category of thought, agases, in a clear Platonic spirit. One can see all of these philosophical assumptions in the whole of the creationist reply to evolutionary theory even today, in its insistence that, to give a couple of examples, a dolphin could not evolve from a dog, violation of immutable types or baramins, or that random mutation could not possibly explain the aggressive mimicry of the rove beetle or of the spider-tailed viper, appeal to the rational plan of the world. Looking at you, Bennett. Thus, the relationship of Platonism and its slow repudiation across the history of Western thought remains an underappreciated element in explaining why the theory of evolution arose when and where it did. The first cracks of the eggshell which returned to the pre-Socratic world of ceaseless change, fully imbued with the life of the divine gods, can be understood as a significant contribution to the genesis of evolutionary thought, even if their respective thinkers retain significant residues of Platonism in other respects. As a matter of fact, the germinating seeds of evolutionary thought were so plentiful throughout the 18th and 19th centuries that one could wonder what took it so long to finally be presented as a cohesive and unique theory of life. Perhaps it was because there was an innumerable quantity of varied philosophies of life sprouting and spreading throughout this period. Lebensphilosophy, idealism, philosophy, vitalism, romanticism, and so on. Mayer was of the belief that the residual Platonism in these systems of thought explained why German zoologists in the 19th century struggled to explain what the Englishmen so effortlessly put to print. However, in each of these systems, it is not too difficult to detect both direct and indirect influences upon the later scientific evolutionary theory. Strangely, a system of thought which was intended to rebuke the mere materialism of its English and French contemporaries found itself as a key scaffold for the later whole of evolutionary theory between Darwin and Dawkins. A fitting example of this philosophical inquiry towards organic life that heralds the future evolutionary dogma can be found in the works of J.W. Gertie, who himself was a key contributor to a number of evolutionist breakthroughs. During his travels to Italy in his 30s, he studied the organs and structures of plant life in search of what he called a Yorkflans, the singular plant from which all other plant life could generate from. Though even the description of one species being produced from another is revolutionary, he went further in formulating the first theory of homologous structures in his Metamorphosis of Plants, 1790, which showed that certain organs and structures of plant life were common to different species and, potentially, generated from the same ancient source. He even went as far to describe the nature of plant life as protean, referring to that mythical god of ceaseless change and disguise which so perfectly illustrates the evolutionary perspective. To boot, some years later he would again display the importance of homologous structures by discovering the previously mythical premaxillar bone in humans, which was at the time thought to have belonged only to apes, not man. In Goethe's early evolutionist thought, we see two concepts utterly essential to the later theory of Darwin. 1. The relationship of all life through modification, and 2. The inclusion of man into this theoretical framework of nature. For thousands of years had the Platonic concept of the great chain of being stood tall, enforcing not only a rigid and changeless description of nature with each species representing its designated ideal form, but the primacy of mankind atop all others as closest to divine perfection. Now, through Goethe and his contemporaries, we see the first inklings of its inevitable collapse. For the first time since the pre-Socratics, we were taking seriously the proposition that all of nature is fundamentally interconnected into one, diversified only by degree, and never by kind. However, one must remember Goethe's position as the standard-bearer of Romanticism. It was not his intention, and would be his disgust, to simply formulate a material or subject-less science. Goethe and his contemporaries were more accurately metaphysicians of nature, who sought to descend into the depths and essence of life, and in stark opposition to the materialism of Bacon and Descartes, who sought to erect firm barriers between observer and the observed. This experimental approach to science was the basis of his namesake Goethean science, which served as his guiding light for not just his own endeavors, but later philosophical approaches to science such as phenomenology, too.